agenda under C1. Okay, which takes us to public input. We had 2 requests accepted and 1 was withdrawn. And that was, the one withdrawn was Claudia Moran, and that was about street closures in the city centre, and it was to do with the master plan, city centre master plan refresh and our decisions of the November planning committee meeting. The request was approved by me, but the requester has since withdrawn, which takes us to 2 that have been accepted on matters relevant to the work of this committee. The first is from Michael Eagle, the Chief Executive at McMullen and Wing, a marine design and fabrication company. And the second we'll come to is from Generation Zero, led by Leroy Beckett, and that is on their work around public transport fares. And they will give us a presentation on that, both relevant to the committee. The first, Michael Eagle, relates to ferry procurement and the development of a possible strategy that Auckland Transport are currently working on. So, firstly, I will welcome, and I've already introduced you, Michael. You're from McMullen and Wing. You might like to give us a bit of a background to the history of McMullen and Wing. I know you were in the America's Cup boat building business way back when the America's Cup was located at Fremantle and in 1995 at San Diego. But I will let you give us some background on McMullen and Wing and what you're planning in the future. Thank you, Michael.
Right, tēnā tata katoa. My name is Michael. I'm Chief Executive at McMullen and Wing, which is a boat building company on the banks of the Tamaki River. We've been in business for 52 years. And yeah, we've done everything, as Councillor Darby says, from America's Cup racing yachts, including the ones that won in 1995, through super yachts, and now focused on commercial vessels. My focus here is on 2021, and I think I'm not telling anybody anything new to say that 2021 will be a fairly big year for Auckland, but probably also not telling anyone new to say that it needs to be needs to be about much more than what is happening here in 2021. It needs to be about what happens because of what's happening here in 2021. So what if there was an industry here in Auckland that had the opportunity not only to offer a huge and very visible boost to Auckland's sustainability, but also to make our city a showcase and global export centre for zero emission transportation? And what if 2021 was the year that made that happen? For those that have already heard the presentation I gave at a vision breakfast, forgive me, Deputy Mayor, but for the rest, please just imagine very briefly that it's a Tuesday morning, but it's a Tuesday morning in March 2021, and the America's Cup is on, and there's 1,000 international journalists here, and they've been talking about these amazing 75-foot foiling yachts invented here in New Zealand, and parallels are drawn with New Zealand's early America's Cup campaigns of the 80s and 90s, and the innovation and the technology, the leadership and the collaboration. And this morning in March 2021, a gathering of international journalists forms at the newly refurbished downtown ferry terminal, that one there, to witness a different story of America's Cup technology. 2 strikingly modern vessels glide into the ferry basin. Low and sleek, these ferries are silent, free of fumes, low wash, and fully electric. The product of a collaboration of New Zealand's best design, engineering, and boat building brains. The journalists learned that these ferries involved contributions from marine industry, ferry operators, energy companies, sustainability experts, mana whenua, and local and central government. This is a story of true Kiwi innovation and America's Cup trickle down for the people, not only of technology, but of leadership and collaboration. Now please cast your mind forward another 8 months, and it's November 2021, and it's the final day of Leaders Week at APEC. We have the spotlight, under which our Prime Minister announces New Zealand's commitment to Auckland's whole commuter ferry fleet running on electric propulsion by 2025. Nearly 13 million litres of diesel are saved every year, 35,000 tonnes of carbon. A major green tech industry is born, and New Zealand steps up to a position of leadership in the low emissions transportation world. That vision, oops, I pushed the wrong button, but there you go. It's only really pretty pictures. That vision is very real. We have an ageing fleet and a growing city, and our climate is crying out for us to cut emissions. But much more than that. Imagine if we could move fast enough to get there first. For Auckland to become the centre of global attention for zero-emission commuter ferries, as Norway has become for zero-emission electric car ferries. Hundreds of jobs, hundreds of millions of dollars of export income, and an opportunity for Auckland to lead the world in a green transportation niche. How about that for an America's Cup legacy? It can happen, and some of it is happening already. Our company, McMullen & Wing, is leading a collaboration to develop a range of electric fast ferries suitable for the harbour cities of the world. And I'm especially pleased and grateful to announce this week that Auckland's largest ferry operator, Fuller's 360, is making a direct financial contribution to our first stage R&D program. And equally importantly, they're inputting their information and experience directly into our development work. They're doing this because they're motivated to apply electric ferries to their own routes, initially Devonport. Good news, right? To a point, yes, but we see this as being about so much more than electrifying the Devonport ferry. This should be about a long-term sustainability strategy for Auckland Transport, and equally importantly, and hand in hand with that, it should be stitched together with an economic development strategy for Auckland Council. Sustainability and economic development hand in hand. So councillors, if you think that it would be best to let process take its course towards a replacement fleet of fossil fuel ferries, then do nothing, because that's where everything was headed before we got involved. But if you agree that the time for electric ferries is this time and not next time, and in particular, if you agree that it would be a great thing for Auckland to see its industry step up to a position of global leadership in green transportation, then I do need your help. So I've got three things I need to ask you for. The first one, I'd like to invite, and if it is the will of this committee, I'd like to ask for your endorsement of our invitation to Auckland Transport to participate directly in our R&D program. As it stands, Fuller's are the only one that have stepped up to that, and by being around our table, they have the opportunity to influence the products that we develop. Secondly, and quite separately from that, I'd like to ask if you would be prepared to write to the Minister of Energy and Resources in relation to the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, and request that the rule which prohibits maritime projects from being considered for the low emission contestable fund, low emission vehicles contestable fund, be removed. But for being maritime, ECA agrees with us that ours is precisely the type of project which ECA was conceived to enable, and I assure you we will need their help for the next much larger stage of our design and development program. Thirdly, I guess I would encourage the Council to explore working with Auckland Transport to recognise the value of their public procurement, not only as a way to buy, but as a way to enable economic development outcomes which are great for our city. Ours is an example of the type of legacy project which our whole city would be proud of, and I believe such projects deserve better than to be pushed from silo to silo. So I think my time is up. Thank you for the opportunity to present. Kia
Thank you, Michael. And members, just by way of background, Auckland Transport have confirmed the Regional Public Transport Plan. That now incorporates the ferry strategy, and out of that they are now working on, I think it's termed a ferry procurement plan or ferry procurement strategy. So that is live work and yet to be determined. It's in train right now. And so it's appropriate that Michael's contribution fits into that. So I think today at least we will acknowledge Michael and McMullen Wing's contribution and refer it to Auckland Transport for their consideration as part of the ferry procurement strategy or plan, whatever it might be called. We'll tidy that up. But there's another key question there about the prohibition for marine industries making applications under the Low Emissions Contestable Fund managed by ECA. Questions of Michael? Councillor Watson.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for your presentation. Very, very interesting. Do you have any sort of indicative data on the cost structures of running electric ferries, both in terms of the craft themselves and then the operating costs? And I think particularly of some of our places in Auckland where the fares are already like very expensive, and also the speed, like in terms of commuter speed.
Sure, absolutely. In general terms, the numbers we've done so far, and bear in mind we're in the middle of a much more detailed sort of acid test feasibility study, but the numbers we've done so far gives me good confidence that our energy costs will be under half what they are with the current diesel fleet. But of course, the underlying economics work in a very similar way to electrifying buses. It does look like the ferries will be more expensive. As to the absolute value, it depends very, very much on just how much battery needs to be put into it, and we're playing the balance between more battery and less charging and so on at the moment. So I can't give absolute value numbers, but in general terms, it's a similar equation to with buses. Yes, it does cost more for the boat initially, but it costs a lot less to operate. As for how that filters through into the fare structure, I guess that's a bit past my pay grade. That's an Auckland Transport and ferry operator discussion about how they amortise those costs.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
So, a couple of questions. First one, and I'm making the assumption that it's inevitable that this happens, and ideally sooner rather than later. Are you identifying any early requirements in terms of provisioning for charging facilities downtown? And by that I mean in the vicinity of the ferry buildings, because there are works occurring there now or soon, and obviously it's desirable to have all the conduits and everything in place. So you're identifying those things?
Yes, we are. We do have some dialogue with Auckland Transport on this. The latest I heard is that there are conduits going in for future cabling. It's also fair to say that if one were to choose, the downtown ferry terminal isn't the ideal place to spend time tied up charging. The ideal is, of course, to be out, and the ferry terminal most times of the day is a pretty busy place, and it really pains me to see boats that have rushed all the way across the harbour stopping and waiting for a berth to come on. So much better if we can to get the charging away from there. In reality, boats do spend their time overnight in the ferry terminal, so there will need to be some charge there. And yes, I understand that there is conduit going in at the moment.
So just another quick question. Are you familiar with the marina strategy that's underway?
Not in any detail.
Okay, in which case, my suggestion is you engage in that. And the last question, just around your ferries, is there a prospect of them being suitable for a run like the Gulf Harbour run, which is a little bit more open ocean?
Yes, absolutely. So really the primary impediment to suitability for the Gulf Harbour run for a catamaran is the height of the wing deck above the water. What we're envisaging, and Auckland Transport, I think, shares this vision, is single deck boats. The problem with stairs is people fall down them and they're actually quite space inefficient. So single deck boats means that we don't have any great reason to be particularly low slung. So the idea is to have plenty of wing deck clearance so that, yes, we can run these boats on any of the current or future envisioned routes, including Gulf Harbour. And I guess to speak to the point, sorry, Councillor Watson, which I missed before about speed, these are envisaged as fast ferries. In a sense, that is the part of this project which is unique to what we're doing here. And they're very much the same kind of speed as the ferries which are running now. The exception to that, I would say, would be that the Pine Harbour ferries are an extremely fast service. It's about a 30-knot service. And we'll be suggesting to Auckland Transport that they don't need to be, and that it would be a very small concession to drop that to 25 knots for a very big benefit. And if they didn't have to spend time waiting for a berth at downtown, then the passengers would get there just as quick.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Meg Hayes.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm sure everybody around the table shares the vision of having a carbon-free ferry service, and that's where we need to get to. I think about three questions. One, can you tell us, you're doing R&D work, but can you tell us what progress has been made overseas towards the introduction of electric ferries, was question one. Two, what do you calculate the distance capacity of these ferries would be? How far will the battery take you, and how long does it charge the battery? I presume there'll be parallels with bus batteries, etc., so there'll be a bit of work done there. And the third and last question is, Ports of Auckland are obviously looking at a hydrogen option on the wharf, which might be very suitable for ferries. Have you weighed up the option between electric and hydrogen?
Okay, thank you, Meg. Yes. Your first question on progress overseas, Norway is very much leading the world in electric ferries, and they've gone into electric car ferries across their fjords in a big way. And we're leaning very heavily on the reliability which has been proven there. The difference, we're applying it to high-speed lightweight boats, but from an engineering and technical perspective, it's a technical difference rather than anything significant. There are some other projects. There is a medium to low speed hydrogen ferry being done in San Francisco, which is close to launch. And there are a number of much smaller high speed electric ferry projects brewing away. One's been going called the BB Green project up in, I can't remember exactly where that is, up in Scandinavia. That's been going for quite some time, 10 years or so. Not operating, but it's been a project that's been gestating for 10 years or so. I think it will all come on quite quickly. That's one of the reasons why we see a really strong sense of urgency here. If we can be moving quickly and really be the first city in the world to have a significant fleet of electric ferries, then it's a massive opportunity for our industry to be offering that to the world. Otherwise we do what we often do and wait and let that happen from overseas.
Could I just bring you back to the distance and charging time?
Absolutely.
And one, electric versus hydrogen, given that hydrogen will carry you further at the moment.
Absolutely. On the point of distance, it's an interesting point of study for us right at the moment. Do we put large batteries on the boats, make them go for longer and charge them up infrequently, or do we charge them for very short periods of time while they're at the dock? For the boats which operate in the Devonport, Bayswater, Birkenhead kind of routes, they're actually generally, most of their time they're operating quite slow and it's quite short distances, so they don't use much power. So there's there's still an option there. Do we put small batteries on, make them light, less expensive, and make sure we charge them frequently, not necessarily every time? Or do we give them enough battery power to last for the whole of rush hour and then drop into a charge cycle, which I think is probably more likely. The faster ferries, we're probably looking at something like 40 kilometres range, 40 to 50 kilometre range, I would guess. But again, that's very much a work in progress. We'll know a lot more on that in about a month or 6 weeks' time as we come out of this early program. On the point of hydrogen, yes, we have looked at that. I think it's, hydrogen we know is a much more expensive form of energy to use and to buy, but it has huge benefits in terms of the range. So for the short run ferries, we see electric as, if we can make battery electric work, then it's a much better option. It's a much more cost effective option. But for the longer run things, or ferries perhaps where charging infrastructure isn't available at the other end, I haven't looked in detail at what charging would be available at Gulf Harbour in terms of grid support. My vision for Gulf Harbour at the moment would be to go there and back on a single charge. But looking at things like Waiheke, acknowledging that's not an Auckland transport route, but from a technical perspective, those are quite big boats going quite fast, using quite a lot of energy. And there isn't really the grid power on Waiheke to be able to charge them up at that end. So do we go there and back on one charge, or do we use hydrogen? Hydrogen is very much part of our mix in thought process, but I think it's fair to say we see hydrogen having a bigger role in longer route services. We're having that conversation with our aquaculture and fishing customers, for example, at the moment, about saying, how do we embed in your boats the kind of technology that enables you to take on hydrogen when it becomes commercially viable. But certainly it's very much part of the equation, but I don't think it's necessary. I'm hoping it's not, because it is a lot more expensive.
Thank you, Meg Hayes. Councillor Sayers?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but my questions have all been asked. I'm happy to second your motion, if you like, up there as well, and I thank you for your presentation. It's great to see the courage and the leadership of such firms in New Zealand, and thank you for making us aware.
Thanks, Councillor Sayers. Councillor Cooper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. And I mean, I wholeheartedly endorse what you're doing. What I wanted to know is, do you having your equipment, that's the moving the vehicles, do you understand the state of our infrastructure around ferry terminals around the harbour? Because that's what I'm concerned about. We can do all of this, but I'm glad Councillor Walker brought up the marina strategy, because that will actually effectively lean more towards berth holders and less towards developing transport hubs. So I think that's something we need to make sure that you look at, because I'd hate to see you invest in all this and us invest in all this and then not have the infrastructure to be able to pick people up or even berth where you say you want to do charging. So if you would, have you had a look at that?
Very good question. Yes, we have. The boats that we're proposing are not markedly bigger than the boats which are currently running in most cases. The exception probably there would be the Hobsonville Marina ferry service. That's quite a challenging service because of where they operate from, right in from a private boat marina. That's the difficult one for sure. Primarily, the first thing we've been looking at, given that the boats are broadly the same kind of footprint format as we're used to running now, what we've been looking at is whether there's charging, whether there's enough grid power there. So we've been working with one of the electricity companies to do a grid review and look at which wharves have got good strong power and which ones haven't. Hobsonville Point, for example, big real estate development, great power right down to the wharf. Downtown's pretty good. Devonport's pretty good. Stanley Point's pretty challenging. I think Birkenhead may be quite challenging. Pretty good power to Bayswater, but it's a marina. I'm very conscious of not only the state of that wharf infrastructure, but also the complexities of the ownership of that structure, those structures, and the realities of getting things done. It suddenly makes developing electric ferries look really easy.
You just also asked you to look at the fact that if you can't increase
just have the mic, please.
So those are some of the issues too. If you can't increase the patronage to actually get there, there'll be a bus there.
Councillor Cooper, can you put your mic on, please?
Oh, sorry, done. That's just something else to look at.
Yes, that's right. I guess that cuts to the core of why we'd really love to have Auckland Transport around the table with us, because it feels like we're doing our best to develop the boats and the technology, but we feel like we're playing in someone else's sandpit when we start getting involved in is there enough parking, are there bus services, can we grow patronage, but also all those questions about, well, how big should the boats be? The downtown ferry terminal is being redesigned around 24-metre ferries. There are reasons to build boats longer, but if we have a limited amount of space to put them, then we'd stay constrained within that. But if it wasn't for some of those constraints, it would be better to build boats longer because they carry their weight better and are more energy efficient. But we all must work within the constraints that we have, and I'm by no means criticising the design or conception of the new downtown ferry terminal, but just acknowledging that it, like everything, brings with it constraints. So yeah, that really is why we'd love to be more involved and have Auckland Transport. We're not asking really to be more involved in Auckland Transport's discussions, but we'd love Auckland Transport to be more involved in what we're doing.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor Cashmore.
Mr. Chair, Mike, good to see you again. Thank you for the presentation down at the waterfront that morning a couple of months ago. couple of questions. First one is about your R&D program. You've got other people, Fuller's signing up to it a bit more. Is it otherwise than that fully funded? Is my first question.
No, it's not. The early stage R&D program we're funding ourselves, and we're grateful for Fuller's support. We have also got an application in with Foundation North under their GIFT program, which we don't yet know whether we've been successful in that. The rubber really hits the road for us in the next stage. Once we get through this feasibility study, that's when it starts getting expensive. I believe that our project fits the objectives of the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority Low Emissions Contestable Fund very well. I think it will also fit the Green Investment Fund very well in terms of access to debt finance. But no, the short answer is it's not fully funded. Obviously, if we can get an order for some boats, that would be the trigger. A couple of boats for Devonport won't be enough to fund the whole of the development program, so it'll be a mix. And I'm working through whether I can account for all of the parts of that mix, yes or not. But if you've got any ideas, then I'd certainly love to hear them.
As the second one, Mr. Chair, if I may, as a follow-on to that, as part of this R&D program, are you looking at this, I guess, the economics, maths and systems around ownership models for the ferry systems, where there's the operator might not necessarily be the owner?
I'm not sure. It's something that we have been discussing. So we're working with PwC on some of the analytics, business analytics side of what we're doing, and I was with them on Friday, and that did come up in discussion. But whether we instruct them to invest energies in that department is something I haven't yet decided. I've got to be careful with my pennies.
Okay, so there's quite a bit of work to do in the next stage. It's going to be quite crucial, because that's going to be how you're going to deliver the services to a growing ferry patronage, whether it's length of boat or frequency of service. There's a balance to pay off there. It's going to have to be quite critical how we get that right. That would be fairly accurate, would it not?
Yes, absolutely. And we ourselves would love to see increased frequency of service, smaller boats, more flexibility across the fleet. We think that that feeds in really well to how boats might charge if we have a limited number of charging stations, each of which is could be quite an expensive asset to install. If they're spread around the network to get the resilience against localised power failures and things like that, then the mix of how boats might operate may look quite different from how it does now. Instead of having a boat that just goes backwards and forwards to Bayswater all day long, there might be much more of a mixed route, more like the airlines do when they move their planes around. Again, we've got ideas, but we sort of feel like we're a bit naive, I guess, and you know, it's not our expert field. And again, I guess that's where we'd love to engage more with Auckland Transport and to get their thoughts on that, because I guess we're trying to develop the boats, but we're absolutely conscious, as you say, that that the viability of whether that'll fly or not is quite dependent on some things which feel like they're out of our control. Yep.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And that question of whether the operator owns a vessel or vessels or Auckland Transport will be considered as part of the Auckland Transport ferry procurement work, which is, as I mentioned, is underway. And just one area, I think we've exhausted good questions that you've fetched and answered on emissions and charging. Understand that these vessels are maybe potentially a bit smaller and therefore more frequent, more agile, quick charging, quick turnarounds. But the other challenge that we've got in Auckland, and as you drop out that displacement of a big diesel unit, your design of your hull changes dramatically. And there's several tonnes, or the Kia would be several tonnes, I'd imagine, of diesel tear weight. One of the challenges we've got is we've got coastal erosion caused by ferries. So how is this opportunity of going to EVs going to take advantage of a complete redesign of hull to address another major problem of coastal erosion and health and safety issues of people being thrown up against walls by wakes? And I know where that happens in Auckland.
I couldn't agree with you more. And my own children are active boaties, kayakers, and sailors of small dinghies at the local yacht club, and we're very aware of of those issues. Low wash is very much part of what we're designing. It's been a source of some amazement to me throughout my career that we've not really legislated for low wash to the extent that a lot of other jurisdictions have, and as a result, we've got a lot of ferries which pick up a lot of wake. Not only ferries, but ferries in particular. But you're right that there are some fundamental differences. Weight is, depends on that balance of whether we go for big batteries or small ones as to whether these boats will be lighter. But one of the key differences is that catamaran ferries traditionally are designed to be wide enough to fit the big diesel engines inside the hulls. And that means they push a whole lot of water aside, which creates a lot of wash. Electric motors are physically a lot smaller, and in fact the way we're able to mount these on the drive units means that the hulls themselves can be a lot narrower, potentially narrower and deeper, which means they slice through the water better and they create a lot less wake. So that's very much part of what we think one of the big benefits of this move is. And whatever the new ferries are, we think that low wash should be a very key part of the design criteria.
Fantastic. I'll close it off there. I think we've had a good look at this. Thank you very much, and thanks for. There's a lot of discussion in the media about those that are building Auckland physically in terms of buildings, but in a different way, you're building Auckland smartly through projects like this that you're working on. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks everybody for your time. Thanks.
If we just refer this work to Auckland Transport for their consideration in their procurement plans, and the other question of the ECA, I'll work with the Chief of Strategy on what that actually is, and if there's opportunity for us to write to ECA, we will do so. But we just need to do some homework on that. That's the first time I've heard of it. So thank you, Michael. Moved and seconded. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you. Calling up Leroy, Generation Zero, to talk about public transport fares and the work you've been doing recently. Leroy, I'll ask you to introduce your team and the work that you've been doing over the last several months.
There we go. Hi, Morena. Thank you for having us. My name is Leroy Beckett. This is Mike.
Hi, I'm Malcolm.
Push your button. And we are three members of Generation Zero Auckland. We are young people who are fighting against climate change through livable cities, better transport, smarter housing, that sort of thing. We've been lucky enough to meet with most of you over our time here, and some of you I'm looking forward to meeting in the future. I know this is
now, if the others could turn their mics off, and you're good, Leroy, so we just need to have the speaker with mic on, others off. Thanks.
Not as experienced as this as you'd think. So I'm just going to introduce this very quickly, and then I'll turn over to these two who actually wrote this report alongside the amazing Lindsay Horn, who couldn't be here today. But I'll give some background to why we're now focusing on public transport fares as a group who primarily focused in the past on infrastructure policy and planning. I'm sure all of you remember a couple of months ago, Auckland Transport announced further fare rises on public transport for Auckland. We felt within our community and the wider community on social media that there was a lot of frustration at this, and we got the sense it wasn't just people annoyed that they were going to have to pay more to take the bus, which is an issue in itself, but also that that goes against the desires of this council, of central government, and of AT themselves to encourage more people to take public transport. We know AT's own research show that those fare rises would reduce the amount of public transport trips in Auckland by hundreds of thousands. So we put together a petition. It did quite well because when you ask people to support them paying less money, they will sign petitions. But sadly, that didn't lead to the fare rises stopping. So we decided to go back and actually think, how do you change the system that led to these changes? And so we focused on the fare box recovery ratio, which we think is a really arbitrary limit that causes these rates rises. And then we looked at, if we do get rid of that at a central government level, what sort of innovations can Auckland Council and Auckland Transport implement that will actually achieve those goals of getting more people onto public transport, making it less of a thing where you're just trying to raise money and actually providing the best service for Aucklanders. So that's where we got to this point, and I'll hand over to these two to go through the details.
Kia ora. So myself and Malik, yes, co-wrote the report along with Lindsay, who could not make it. the key starting point in the report is the fare box recovery policy. There we go. As you can see, we believe it is an ill-fitted policy. For those of you who are not familiar, it requires 50 or aims for 50% of public transport operating costs to be covered by fares. The issue with that is when costs rise, the fares must do so to match. And that's not a sustainable model for a growing public transport network like we have in Auckland. Every time you add more frequency to a service, a new bus route to a new township, the fares must go up to cover those costs. Now, we are advocating for that to be removed, and we call for your support, obviously. But our report focuses on what could be achieved should this policy be removed. Particularly, if you look at all the major infrastructure projects going on in Auckland, the CRL, Eastern Busway, Light Rail, Airport to Botany, the first stage hopefully will be done in time for APEC. But the majority of them will not be done until mid-2020s, 2024, 2026. So what can we do to achieve mode shift and public transport growth before then? Our report, which you have in front of you, contains many proposals based on what is done around the world. I was the one who was investigating what is common practice in Australia. So daily fare caps are used in Melbourne and Sydney, effectively to encourage public transport to be more than just the commute to and from home. You pay one cap for the day. So as you can see, we put some proposed numbers up there. So one zone, say you work in the city centre as well as live here, you bus to and from work, maybe, but then also at lunchtime you need to nip out, go to a meeting or grab a coffee with a friend. You can do that all while paying the same price. It encourages the extra small trips that would be replaced by cars and other stages. I'll pass over to Malik to talk about the student.
Where? At the moment, student discounts for hop card users sits at about 20%. 20% off hop card fares for adults. We're proposing raising it to 50% off across the board, as well as introducing free public transport for under 12s. We see this as, I mean, it's adapted from various initiatives that Melbourne has put in place in Australia, but it will encourage young people to explore the city and to do so on public transport, which we see as inherently safer.
Another aspect to this policy is that we talk a lot about, I think it's very in our culture, that when you get to 16, you get a car and that enables you to freedom, right? You can finally decide where you go on your own accord. And we think that that isn't always the case in Auckland with cost, with congestion, with traffic. And by allowing people under 12 and students a much more affordable way to get around the city, that provides public transport as this beacon of freedom as well. And, you know, we think this policy will get a lot of support from people who have issues with congestion in the morning, with kids being dropped off at school. This provides another incentive for kids to take public transport to school, and also with parents who are sick of being Ubers for their children. That was up.
So free weekends. The thinking behind this policy is weekends are the time the family are most likely to be out doing stuff together. And currently with the public transport fares, everyone would be paying an individual fee. And even with the slightly cheaper cost for children, it would still be much more effective, or well, much more cost effective for families to drive. And for all of our goals for public transport to become the all-day network and encourage people to use it for more than just a general commute, this policy supports that by making public transport a genuine option for families on weekends.
And we saw the success last year of the Free Fridays leading up to Christmas, the support of police for that policy's ability to potentially reduce drink driving. People was on the bus on that evening, you saw the delight in people's faces at being able to take free public transport. And just another way of encouraging more people to try out public transport on the weekend when there's less demand, less peak services, as people get a taste for how good our public transport has got. A pet theory of ours is that Auckland public transport's actually, the secret of Auckland is that it's actually pretty good right now, but there's a ton of people who are set in their ways, who had a bad experience 5-10 years ago and now just drive. This is another way of encouraging people to try out public transport on times when we're already running underused services and then getting them hooked into the amazing network that we do have.
So as you can see in the report in front of you, there are many other recommendations in there. We have focused on the three that we believe will be most effective in supporting mode shift and patronage growth, but there are some easy wins in there, such as increasing the free transfer period. Currently, you have 30 minutes to change from example bus to the train, and for most journeys that will work. But for some areas which have very low frequency routes, you miss one bus, you might be waiting more than half an hour for the next one, and then the customer is effectively punished for that, and sometimes it's beyond their control. The bus previously was running a little bit behind schedule. So just increasing that period gives more flexibility. Other proposals in it were weekend and 6-hour unlimited passes. I think Malik is best informed on.
The Dutch example that they use across the country called OV Chip Cart introduces a number of different options, including sort of unlimited travel for a set amount of time. This includes 6 hours. Some have 12-hour passes, and some continue to implement weekend unlimited travel. This is another recommendation that will enable Auckland Transport to offer more options that can be programmed into the already existing ad hoc card system, and provides people with more choice, as well as a series of different sort of fare options to opt for.
So currently with the HOP card, it costs you $10 upfront cost, not including any credit. And that is a barrier for a lot of our lowest income residents. So it also impacts tourists. So we have two proposals up there. The first, so disposable paper HOP card, ideal for tourists coming in. We make that $2-3, really easy to pick up at the likes of the airport, those coming off cruise ships, and that will encourage them to embrace public transport in their time here in Auckland. The $6 credit for all new HOP cards could have a similar effect for tourists, but would have a more positive effect for those who are lower socio-economic backgrounds. Where that upfront cost, for example, parents might not want to buy their kid one because $10 upfront cost might be a lot for them in their weekly budget. And then, of course, what happens when the kid loses it, which kids do, then they need to replace it. And you see this a lot in some suburbs where you'll see a lot of more people using cash, even though it is more costly for the trip. It's that upfront cost barrier that we are trying to remove. $6 credit on all new HOP cards effectively makes a card $4. and makes it much more accessible.
Cool. Yeah. And to answer some questions that I know will be coming, we don't have the resources of Auckland Transport, so we don't have full costings on this yet. We definitely think of this as the start of the conversation and shifting our view of public transport fares as just revenue towards being a way that we can encourage more people to take public transport. We don't expect these to be anywhere near the cost of infrastructure projects. A lot of these changes are encouraging people to use more off-peak services, which won't lead to an increase in services, which is where the cost increase would come from there. And we also understand that this committee and this council do not have the power to change the fare box recovery ratio. We're excited to meet with central government, Minister Twyford's office have this report. We're excited to meet with Auckland Transport and to carry this process forward. This is really just the start of this conversation. Yeah, we're welcome to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Leroy and Malik and Malcolm. We'll take some questions. And just a little sense setter, members, Councillor Hills raised the question of the annual fare increases or review of fares, wrote to Auckland Transport Chief Executive, and out of that, the Mayor, myself and Councillor Hills wrote to the Minister about fares, and the result was a mode shift program of work has been set up. The Minister has instructed NZTA and Auckland Transport to work together with Auckland Council on a mode shift plan, and a critical part of that work is looking at fares. And I think it has already been reported that the Minister is agnostic about the fare box recovery ratios. There's a bigger task to be undertaken here in the mode shift plan. So questions, Deputy Chair, please.
Thank you, Chair. And sorry, I don't have a question, just a quick comment. But yeah, this is fantastic work reading through it last week. Yeah, really impressed with some of the work. I think a lot of it many of us have asked or are interested in on already. I think things that could be done overnight are like the 1 hour gap. You know, it's clear someone misses a service, why should they be punished, especially if it's our fault the half an hour service or 15-minute service was late or early. But also just would change that whole small trip attractiveness. If you can do several trips or do your shopping and jump back on the bus and not be charged any extra, it's just a no-brainer. And we have asked for some of the just core kind of funding of what the missing revenue would look like, but it doesn't take into consideration what the increased use in services, say like free weekends for kids, or even free at all for kids with parents, which Skybus, a commercial service, actually does to increase their attractiveness. So more adults travelling, obviously with, I think it's up to 4 kids. Yeah, it's an obvious thing to do. So just want to say thanks. It's not a question, but it's just a comment that you're doing great work. You know, done a lot of great work over the time on transport and unitary plan and things, and I think this is the next step while we're waiting for those big infrastructure projects, as you said. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thanks for your work on pushing this forward.
Thank you. Question from Councillor Sayers, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Chairman, for your presentation. Just wonder if you could, I'm just trying to understand a bit more about that fare ratio. Was it the fare box recovery ratio? So does that mean if it has to be, if it's a 50% target, does that mean that every service has to return the 50%, or some of them might not recover the 50% and others have to be higher, so on average it's 50%? Could you just help me understand that a little bit better?
Yeah, it does work on an average, thankfully. Otherwise, we would have some routes probably actually wouldn't exist, would they, if there had to be a 50% recovery ratio. Yes, it's spread across. So some routes, for example, the Northern Express routes, the 70 running out to Botany, I believe, operate at maybe 70 to 80% cost recovery. And then that is effectively redistributed to help other services exist.
Thank you for that. That's very helpful. And also, I'm probably just picking on Councillor Hill's comments in your earlier anticipation of the financial question. Hopefully you'll get some feedback on that that's going to be helpful for you. So look forward to any updates.
Right. Yeah, we're looking forward to seeing those numbers too.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Newman, please.
Yeah, thank you. I've had a read through the report, very interesting and some really salient points. What I'm wondering is mode share achieved by providing
public transport services to communities that don't have those services currently? And if so, should Auckland Transport's focus be on providing services to communities that don't have them? Or does the focus instead have to go on on reducing the fares or capping the fare costs for communities where public transport services may currently be abundant?
I'll take that one. It's a really interesting debate that people who work in this field and us who lobby support in this field discuss all the time. Public transport is a public service, and we cannot stress that enough, that everyone should have access to it. Obviously, though, with a growing city and a city of our size, public transport has a really important role in providing a congestion-free option for people. With the costing of that, I know that some of our more rural communities have looked for targeted transport rate to help subsidise. So I believe Hobsonville have done that through their association for the ferries, and Rodney have recently implemented that new bus routes have come in. My personal opinion is that it's a very hard one to give a simple answer to. We need to provide to everywhere in Auckland, all the new communities. We shouldn't leave them isolated, deprived of this option. But at the same time, we do need to really shift those who do live closer to the city out of their cars, reduce congestion, and because there are multiple benefits from that: social, economic, health, everything. So I hope that gives you something.
I've got another question, because you said at the same time. So I don't represent a rural ward. I represent an urban, a very outer suburban ward. And I have neighbourhoods in my ward that don't have bus services, and we are working to procure bus services through the RPT.
Sorry, which area do you...
Maniarewa Papakura.
Okay.
So I can point to new services that are going to be procured under the RPTP, and I'm wondering, with the scarce resources that we have, if there is an opportunity cost that's being made here, is the opportunity cost of capping fare services going to be paid for by not advancing the range of services to communities that don't currently have PT?
I think part of the answer there is what Malcolm touched on before with the answer about fare box recovery ratio. By encouraging people to use the services they do currently have, we provide more revenue that can be used to cover services further out that perhaps don't have as much revenue, and providing new services to places that don't have them is about making the most of the services that we are running so that we can provide those new services to bring new people onto the public transport network. I'm not entirely sure we have the perfect answer for this yet, but I think there's definitely something where we should think more on, so thanks for bringing that up. Yeah.
I'll just jump in with one example from our report. We cited Queenstown's flat fares. So it was 2017, I believe. They implemented a flat fare, $2, regardless of how far you travelled on the network. That increased patronage by 153% and actually increased revenue by 6%, despite obviously decreasing the cost per trip. Now, because we have a much higher base, I don't expect that sort of effect from any of our policies, but it doesn't necessarily mean a lot of revenue will be lost. I guess it's sort of like induced demand, like we have with our road network. You create these opportunities and people will take them. So revenue, obviously we can't do the costings, that would be up to AT, but there could be a lot of extra we hope there'd be a lot of extra trips generated from these policies that will actually start to make back some of that revenue as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wayne Walker.
around accelerating what you're suggesting. First off, in terms of the next step on Auckland Transport's part, what you've demonstrated is that most, if not all, of what you're suggesting is already in place in other cities in some way, shape or form. So what follows is some of the work's not going to be too difficult. So have you given some thought as to what time and effort Auckland Transport requires to take this the next step? How rapidly that could happen?
In brief, a lot of these changes are sort of software programming based and can be programmed into the existing fare collection system with sort of minimal effort. There's probably a longer time frame in terms of training all staff who work at train stations and the like, which might sort of bring it up, but it shouldn't take as long as sort of building new infrastructure. We've focused in the report on solutions that don't require sort of heavy capital expenditure for the most part.
Okay, and my second question is, again, just goes to acceleration, and that's whether you've given any thought to maybe having a trial for something, let's say a free weekend or the like on an occasional basis, and what that might look like and how easy that might be to implement.
Yeah, so I think we've already seen the success of the one-off trial last year of the free public transport across the network. We think that was really successful. We think implementing that to show that the system works, we can collect more data on how this actually affects usership going forward. We'd love to see trials. I think that's been a really effective way that this council and Auckland Transport have pushed ideas into the debate in Auckland to show that these ideas actually work a lot of the time with transport ideas on paper and in meetings like this seem a little bit far-fetched once you put them into the public realm. The support is shown, so I think that's a great idea. Yeah. And in terms of implementation, we'd expect months, not years, but we understand that this needs to go through a central government process, so that might slow things down.
Thank you. Now, I've got 7 members that would like to ask questions, so if we can maybe get through 1 or 2 questions max, and then we'll come for a second round if we've got time. I am mindful of time.
Open if any of councillors would like to meet with us later, one-to-one, to go more in depth through these questions. We'd welcome that.
Okay. Firstly, Councillor Casey.
Thank you for coming today. My question relates to the reason that you're here, which is Auckland Transport's decision to increase the fares. And you've got a sentence at the end, unilateral decision, did I miss that, to increase fares. You've got a sentence in your conclusions, which I'd like to read you because I'd like you to expand on it. And the sentence reads, further fare increases will minimise the potential impact of major infrastructure projects such as the City Rail Link and Light Rail, and ultimately result in the failure of Auckland's public transport as a public service. Would you like to expand upon that, please?
Yeah, we think of public transport in Auckland as a public service. People should be able to travel around our city sustainably and without congestion. If we continue to increase prices on public transport, fewer and fewer people will be able to afford it. More people will be pushed back into their cars. One of the reasons that we went so deep into this report was we were hearing from our own members, people who, weekly are advocating for solutions to climate change, who are being pushed back into driving to university and paying all day because that was a cheaper option, and they're students who are living on budgets. We think across Auckland this is already an issue. I think often the cost of living in Auckland is far too high. And that's only going to get worse if we continue to push up public transport pricing. We think there's a lot of equity issues here, there's a lot of access issues here. This is just one way that we can kind of make Auckland just a better place to live for everyone. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Councillor Casey. Megov.
Thank you very much, Leroy, Malcolm and Malik. Very good presentation. And just so you know where that might go, we're meeting with both Transport Ministers next Friday. It's a workshop between AT, NZTA and Auckland Council, and I'd like to throw your proposals into the mix. And I like the idea of trialling things if you can get the win-win situation where you can maybe keep your fare down, but your patronage increases and your total fare goes up, that's what we'd ideally look for. Now, my question is really, the world is not quite as simple as I've just made it out to be. As you know, extend the transport network, we're trying to improve the quality and we're trying to keep fares low and reasonable. But the money to do all three of those things comes out of the same pool, and it can be a zero-sum game. With the increase in February, it's interesting that actually because we'd changed our bus network and did a couple of other things, actually our public transport usage went up by 11% over last year, which is great because we've just about hit 98 million passenger trips a year. But what the meeting on Friday is about looking at the fare box policy, because we're bound by that at the moment, but looking at how, with the particular investment we put in, how can we get the best combination of those three things? Extending the network, which I think was Councillor Newman's point, improving the quality and keeping fares low and reasonable. But I I'm interested if you acknowledge that actually if Auckland Transport hadn't put that 1.9 up, apart from being in breach of farebox policy, that would have deprived them of $3.7 million for the coming financial year. And unless we can put that in to compensate for it, that may detract from extending the network and the quality, both of which are essential. Do you acknowledge that point? Because I think it's important to do so.
And that's always going to be an issue for any project in Auckland. You know, the purse strings are tight. Something I want to bring up in terms of, it's amazing to see how much public transport usage has grown in Auckland, particularly since the introduction of the new bus network. I will point out that that network is designed to get people to take multiple trips for one journey, and those numbers do. So say me, I no longer take one bus to work, I take two. That's great, I'm perfectly fine with that. That is counted as 2 trips in those numbers. So that's just me being a little bit petty. Yeah. So we should focus on the best way that we can spend money to increase public transport usage in Auckland. I think there hasn't been nearly enough thought and effort put into that conversation around public transport fares. We've done a lot of advocacy for extending that network and increasing our infrastructure, and I think there is a balance there. I think that $3.7 million number is incredibly small given the scale of infrastructure projects that are being launched in Auckland, particularly some trials that are going on at Auckland Transport, ideas that are being put in. There are good ideas, but we think there needs to be more weight put towards the fare side of this, and it's really encouraging to see that that's being looked into on such a high level. Thank you.
Cool. Councillor Watson.
Thanks for your presentation, gentlemen, and take the point you make about the upfront cost as being a disincentive for people. Just going conversely, I think of the situation in Vienna where I think people pay €365 a year, and that's for unlimited access to the subway, to trams, to buses. Have you, in amongst your impressive research, have you looked at how any kind of proposal like that might stack up, say particularly for a sample group, say like university students who might bung that on their fees or have a payment thing, and that covers it for a big period of time? Is any data come through on that sort of scheme?
About sort of 8 years ago, I lived in Vancouver in British Columbia, where the University of British Columbia, as well as Simon Fraser University, sort of tack on an extra per semester. I believe an extra, it used to be about $60 for unlimited travel on the entire public transport network within Vancouver. I believe that number has raised probably to something like $100 per semester, but that is still significantly better than anything that we have on offer currently in Auckland. We did briefly look at that in our initial research for this report, but at the end of the day, it is sort of a unique example because apart from Vienna, there are a small number of cities in the world where that's been accepted. The Estonian capital Tallinn has been mentioned in the final draft of the report that you have a copy of there, and that city plays a lot with the idea of having young people quite simply travel for free as much as possible. They they match up to public holidays and try and find civic festivals like public transport weeks and public transport months in order to implement that. So that's some of the research we've come across thus far.
I also just want to add the point. So you have this sort of caps, or you get a pass. The advantage with setting a cap is if you don't spend up to that, then you're fine. You only pay for what you've used, as opposed to currently AT do a monthly pass, which I believe is around the $215 mark, which makes a lot of sense for those commuting the furthest. But for those living closer in, it's a huge upfront cost, and you wouldn't be sure if you're going to make the most of that. And that's where caps are the most effective. Obviously, if you're looking at a year, we haven't looked at a year cap in our report, although it's something that maybe AT could do costings for. But daily and monthly caps, obviously, you know, something comes up and you don't take the amount of trips you thought you were going to, then you're not out of pocket either. Yeah. So they have an advantage over a pass, if that's all.
Good. And Councillor Fletcher.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. I'm really excited about your presentation today, and notwithstanding the points that Councillor Newman correctly makes, that we mustn't deprive those areas that don't have access to public transport now. I've had a huge amount of dissatisfaction when we did a lot of work on the introduction of Hop Card because of the restrictions of the fare box. I think the thing that I am most excited about is that the advocacy that you can bring on our behalf to the Minister of Transport. Maybe, I don't know, my question to you is, are you aware that for my generation, I had a free pass to catch the train every day that I attended school from Papakura into town. And so there is a precedent for free public transport for school-aged children. And that has always irritated me that we didn't look at an equivalent. So firstly, are you aware that there is a precedent? It didn't apply to buses, it only applied to rail, but be that as it may, that should be instructive in terms of getting equity between generations, which is what your purpose is, I think, sometimes. So are you aware of that?
I'm not sure that we were. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
It's probably one of the reasons that I had a passion for bringing rail, availability to rail, because
that worked out so well for Auckland. So
yeah,
the benefits of that policy continue. No, that's really good to hear. That's like an incredible point to add to that. We're at the moment collecting stories from members of our community. I just checked, I think there's about 200 people who've submitted their stories as to how this policy would affect their lives that we're putting together to send to the Minister's office. So hopefully...
Well, I just wish you well with it, because there has been a resistance from governments, both left and right, to actually reconsider that particular issue. And I think it's one which shouldn't fall on the ratepayer, but I do think it's part of... the responsibility of central government, and the policy parameters that we're having to work to at the moment are just not delivering the effectiveness that we'd like to see.
Yeah, we totally agree. It was part of what's so great to see the support around the table this morning is something that was very frustrating during those rates increases, was to see so many powerful figures kind of shrug this question off, people who don't entirely support it, but wouldn't stand up to say that it should change. So it's really encouraging to see. Right
I think also the other opportunity is, I've never been happy with the zoning that we've got, and I think that this is a really good opportunity to address that at the same time.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Clow, please.
No, I just want to second it, and I think we should add Lindsay Horn's name to the thanks as well, given he's the co-author.
Oh, we can do it because there's Lindy's not here, but we can.
Yes, if you could on the cover of the report.
We'll do that.
If I can make a comment though, we spend a lot of money with Price Waterhouse and EY, and I can say it's a very concise, clear report. And please leave your business cards.
Thank you, Councillor Clow. Councillor Hulse.
Thank you, Councillor Clow beat me to it. I was going to second, but if I could just make a couple of very quick comments to echo the appreciation and the thanks, and possibly to challenge us with, we're asking a lot of Gen Zero who've done all the hard mahi in the background and the thinking and the academic work. The questions asked of Gen Zero are actually questions we need to be asking of ourselves, and the Mayor has quite rightly pointed out, thanks to yours and Councillor Hill's hard work, that we've got the Minister to talk to. There's a fundamental economic debate we need to have about public car transport and how that's subsidised and how public transport's subsidised. And that's, for me, the big gig in town. That's where the discussion needs to take place. If we went to road users and private car users and said, you will pay, the return to fare box on that is half the cost of road building, road maintenance and allowing you to drive your private vehicle, I think the debate would change. And for those standing on a platform of getting rid of the regional petrol tax, I say let's actually look at what that is helping fund. And if you're prepared to do that, what are you putting in its place that can help subsidise fares? So I think we have some questions, Mr Chair, under your leadership to ask ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hulse. And Councillor Filipino.
Thank you, Chair, and tēnā koutou katoa, gentlemen. Look, my question is based on your executive summary and also from 16, the page of 16, which is recommendations for the Auckland context, which outlines further detail around your bullet points on 2. This is solely reliant on the removal of the fare box recovery policy.
Yes. You would not be able to implement any of those, with the exception of probably the hour transfer period, without the removal of the policy. Otherwise, you would face issue with the Ministry for Transport NZTA regarding the ratio and what Auckland is required to be holding the percentage.
Two just very quick ones. Plain devil's advocate here, and the policy is not removed. Have you done any work on what would be good practice or good recommendations for us in the event that that happens?
We are advocating very hard for it to be removed, and we advise you all do as well. We have also started to make the moves for this not just to be an Auckland issue. That will develop in the next couple of weeks, I think you'll see, but our other major cities will also start to hear about this.
Part of the power in removing fare box recovery ratio is without it, you really do have your hands tied behind your back to deal with this issue. You are forced to go through with things, as we've already seen, are not in line with the values of this council or Auckland Transport. It's really about providing the opportunities for councils who do want to be more innovative, who do see this as an issue to go forward with it. At the moment, you do not have the power to do that. So that's why we think it should change.
Okay. So none at the moment, but we've got our fingers crossed. That's basically what you're saying.
Fingers crossed, but
yeah.
Extending the transition for the free fares from 30 minutes to an hour, I think you could do, and I think that would help a lot of people. But yeah.
And Chair, last question, and it's on funding on 21. So have you done any work around the cost sharing of the fare? If it is removed, have you done any work on that? Because obviously it's coming back to our ratepayers, and just really knowing how much would that end up costing, even if it's a cost share with NZTA. So any work around that, if it goes, I just wanted to play devil's advocate, Chair.
For sure, that's great. As Leroy sort of mentioned there, it's a little bit about giving you, the council, the independence without this constraint to make the decisions.
Yeah, we don't have those numbers. We don't have that work. Where that comes back to at the moment, our expectation is, and we can't back this up, that compared to a lot of the infrastructure costs that council is putting at the moment, it would be very small for the effects that it would have. But again, this is really the start of that conversation. Those numbers will come from people with more resources. And I understand Auckland Transport are already looking into the costings of the way this does. What we do know from numbers that are already out there is that increasing the fares reduces the amount of people on our public transport, which reduces the revenue coming in. Yeah.
I think, Chair, the most important thing is around that policy and getting rid of it. So what His Worship the Mayor, but also the preamble that you gave prior to the presentation around the work that's already been done and the meeting with the ministers, that is so important. So look, I look forward to that particular meeting, because all this is predicated on the fare box recovery policy not being there and then working around your funding that you've suggested in page 21. Thank you.
Look, I think we'll wrap it there. Thank you very much. So, as I said at the beginning, I don't want to speak on behalf of the Minister, but I think he's actually said he considers the fare box recovery quite a simplistic tool. He wants to look at a much bigger plan to shift mode, including fares. And that's what we'll be exploring with him. Your document has already been telegraphed to AT. They've landed it. They're starting to look at it already. They are already starting to model some scenarios, as you've asked them to, and others have asked. One of the scenarios that I asked them to look at was 5 to 15 weekends and public holidays travelling fare free, and that comes with a cost of, say, for example, $623,000. But that's the gross cost. It doesn't take into account induced demand and the revenues you get out of the parents, the guardians, and the plus 15-year-old siblings travelling now as families, which evidence suggests, you're suggesting that there's resistance to that because it is a big fare for a whole family to travel. So you've provided some great opportunities for the MOCHA program to start looking at, Auckland Transport side, NZTA side, and it's going to be a much deeper conversation than just fares. But thank you for contribution. Moloch and Lindsay and Malcolm for doing the hard yards, Leroy for pulling them all together, to Generation Zero overall, who are offering us a PricewaterhouseCoopers equivalent at a massive discount. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Hills and Councillor Coe, thank you for the second. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Contrary.